This meeting is for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Murph will be sharing on Heaven is Only a Step Away from God for 50 minutes. This is Murph's second time speaking at the Broken Elevator, and we are delighted to have him with us again. Murph, thank you for your service and your willingness to share your life with us today. At this time, please help me give a warm welcome to Murph from San Francisco, California. His home group is Prime Time. Welcome, and over to you, Murph.
Good morning or afternoon or night, wherever you're at. I just had to get rid of my face staring at me on the screen like they were talking about earlier. Okay. I got to see every wrinkle that I have. That's a great negative before we start. Heaven is just one step away from God. You know, they're in the rooms, everybody has heard it. They call it the 13th step. And I hate associating a step with such a negative thing as someone taking advantage of a person that's new in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so my 13th step, the step that I call the 13th step, is heaven. It's a step that can only be acquired through a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And that is the single and only message that we are supposed to be relaying in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is that spiritual awakening as the result of these 12 steps. And I've been lucky enough to have had that spiritual awakening, and then through practice every day, maintained and grown spiritually. The number one single reason why people relapse in Alcoholics Anonymous is that they fail to grow spiritually. This is a spiritual program. It's not because they stop going to meetings. It's not because they don't have commitments. It's not because they don't have a sponsor. It's because they fail to grow spiritually, or they've never been a part of the spiritual program that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I'm either sober, and we use that word all over Alcoholics Anonymous. And the description of sober is soundness of mind. So heaven is peace of mind. It's walking around without that negative self-talking mind that follows us when we're untreated in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that mind talks to us, like Astrid likes to say, with great authority, because it's coming from myself. And so when I say sober, I mean happy, joyous, and free without a drink. And I'm here to tell you that you can get to this place, because I'm going to say it early for Deb and everybody else. I love Murph. I love myself. I love my life, and I love everything about my life, right? I have my moments, but my life is incredible. And it's because I had that spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Now, on the other hand, there's being dry, right? And that is alcoholism, the definition of alcoholism. I like to call it dry-polar. It's a disease called dry-polar, and it's these extreme highs and these extreme lows, but never being just okay, never being in the middle, never having that clear mind, that quiet mind. And it doesn't matter how many years that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. It doesn't matter if I have 25 or 30 or 35 years. Without that spiritual awakening, I can be that person dry, right? I can be that person with 17, 18, 19 years that's coming into a meeting and complaining about every single thing that's going on in their lives. How ugly their lives are, how their mind is still talking to them negatively, and on and on and on and on. The dog needs hip surgery, and then the whole meeting talks about their dog, but we can be in this place. And then here's a newcomer sitting here in the meeting, and this person is sharing with 17 years how miserable they are. What is going to want a person that's just new to stay in Alcoholics Anonymous if at 17 years, that's what we're talking about in these meetings, right? That's my ego when I share things like that at a meeting. I share those to people after the meeting or before the meeting. I find people that I can trust in Alcoholics Anonymous that have had that awakening, that have a God in their lives, right? And that are living happily. And I gravitate to those people. And so when something is going wrong, like my dog needs hip surgery, I talk to them, but I don't say that at a meeting, right? It's not for what a meeting is here for. A meeting is here to bring a solution to the suffering alcoholic, to the person that's in here suffering, no matter how many years, or that's brand new and just doesn't know what this thing's about, right? And I'd like to say when I'm in that dry polar state, I live in the kingdom of right? And the kingdom of is like, I want everything to be better. I want to look better, right? I want to be happier. I want to be better. I want to be all these right? And I live in this world, of and impossible to live, where I'm at the time. And so, how do I get to this place where I'm walking around in Alcoholics Anonymous like I was, coming to meetings and telling you how wonderful my life was, telling you how great everything is going. And then I would go home and I would be miserable. And I hated my existence. I was living in Alcoholics Anonymous and the daily reprieve that they talk about in the 10-step, I got in meetings, and meetings can't keep me sober, right? I had these beautiful, well-intentioned people that used to tell me, meetings will keep you sober. Go to a lot of meetings, or commitments will keep you sober. Get a lot of commitments. And while those things are so important, they are not going to keep me sober. What they do is they bring me closer to the power that will keep me sober, right? And I say that because I'm this knucklehead that has to be reminded over and over and over again what keeps me sober, and that is God. And if God is a word that is upsetting to you, or that you cringe from, I'm here to let you know that God is mentioned 134 times in the first 164 pages of our book. This is a spiritual program, but it's necessary to find that power. And our book calls that power God. And so I will use the word God, when I'm giving the description. But what gets me to this place where I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, where I think that just putting down that drink is going to fix my life, is going to make me feel better. And it's almost comical that I think that by putting down the drink, I can fix my life. The life that I've screwed up for all these years, and now all of a sudden I don't have a drink in me, and within a week I'm already making plans on what I'm going to do to fix, my life. What takes me to that place? What takes me to the place where I think that things or people, are going to make me happy? And thousands of us spend our lives chasing after things we think are going to make us happy, things that bring us satisfaction, contentment, and joy, only to end up discontent and frustrated. And it may be money, position, higher levels of education. It could be climbing a mountain, being number one in some sport. It could be from acquiring things like new cars or a new boat or a bigger house, right? And these things, they may make us feel excited for a time, but soon we feel empty. And I was that alcoholic who chased after all these things outside of myself to make myself okay. And I didn't understand, nor did I realize that happiness comes from within, right? True happiness comes from within. And for alcoholics, God can bring us joy without things, but things without God will never bring us joy. And that's for the alcoholic, because I have this unsatisfiable mind, right? It doesn't matter what I get. I like to use my friend's thing about, going into the car lot and buying a brand new car, and I'm excited and I'm loving it. and I take the car off the lot. And as I'm taking the car off the lot, somebody else drives onto the lot with the same car, but in a different color. And I'm driving down the road in my brand new car, and I already hate it. Why did I get this color? What is it? And that's the mind of the alcoholic. So our book tells us that our problems center in our minds, right? My problem is not alcohol. My problem is wrong thinking and wrong perceptions, right? That's my problem. And how did I get that way? What caused me to become a person that got to that point where this mind couldn't be shut off, right? And for me, and I call these things emotional traumas. And each and every individual in this Zoom meeting has had some form of an emotional trauma, right? And the emotional traumas, they can be like singular events, like a person passing away or the loss of a job or something like that, or they can be ongoing things like bullying, racism, discrimination, and all these different type of things. And but each one of us has had that, right? And each one of us has reacted to that in a certain way. And we can never judge another person's emotional trauma, whether it's deemed to be way less than I would deem an emotional trauma or way more. Each individual has their own, and it's like a fingerprint. It's like a thumbprint. It's like, I can't judge how a person feels about anything else. And when we do this in Alcoholics Anonymous, we do this in meetings. Like somebody will be hilarious in a meeting and we'll think that this guy's the greatest speaker that's ever spoken Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's been not one piece of a solution that's been shared. And a lot of our stories are funny in many different ways, but I have to focus on what gets me to a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So here I am, right? And I have this emotional trauma as a youngster. And here for Kathy and Jane, I'm getting you ready. And other people might know this. And it's the knock at the door when I was 10 years old. And I ran along holding my mother's robe as I ran to the door. And the door opened and my brother was standing there. And he had his 3-week-old baby in his arms. And he looked at my mother and he said, "Take this baby, I don't want her." Alcoholism and heroin addiction had taken him to a place where he didn't want his own child. And my mom was to take my niece. And my brother was to leave. And I wasn't to see my brother again. He left me and he didn't say goodbye. He was bigger than life to me. And he didn't even say goodbye to me. And I would go on to hate him for years and years and years and years. And the same thing happened with my father. My father ended up getting his dream, a Murphy, buying a bar. You can probably understand. And he got his dream and he bought a bar on the waterfront in San Francisco. And he was an alcoholic. And that's the alcoholic's dream, own their own bar. And he became absent in my life. I was a very gifted athlete. My father played a year of pro football. My grandfather played for the Cubs and the Yankees. And so I was really gifted athletically, and he would promise me he was going to be at the game this time, and I would look up in the stands for him and he wasn't there yet again. And I would watch all my friends and their fathers and mothers would be at the games, and I grew to hate him. And it was a hate I can't even describe. And so that was my emotional trauma. And as a 10-year-old doesn't understand. The only thing I know is that, what happened? What did I do? And I begin to hate, and I begin to hate. And then and that wakes up the ego. And the ego starts to create this false self. Right? And I'm trying to get into these times. And so we start to download different things that we acquire from parents, teachers, jobs, whatever the case may be, girlfriends, boyfriends, and all these things. And I start to download this, right? And each one of us has this awful tape that's downloaded, that tells us, I'm ugly. No one will ever like me. I'll never get this job. No one will ever love me. Everyone's always going to leave me. And this starts it. And as I grow and grow older and older and older, this thing just keeps going and going. And it causes me to start being this unhappy kid. And then I take that first sip of alcohol later on. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I didn't see it at the time, but I started to drink. And as I kept drinking, there came this point where everything shut off. I was no longer thinking about my dad hating me. I was no longer thinking about being abandoned. I was no longer thinking about my brother leaving me. Right? I was right in that moment at that party with my friends. And I was able to enjoy myself for the first time that I can remember. I was able to be at that party and be happy, joyous, and free. And that's what alcohol did for me, right? Alcohol shut this thing off. It shut off the problem. It gave me the illusion of a solution, right? And so I drank and drank and drank and drank. And I drank until I came to this point where the alcohol stopped working. And what I mean by stopped working is no matter how much I drank, I couldn't shut this off. Right? And it's like being untreated, without a drink in you. I can be that same person who can't shut this thing off. I was walking, I live in Burlingame now, and I would take a walk in Burlingame, and this is sober, or excuse me, this is without a drink in me. And I would take this walk down this path, and I took the walk almost every day. And I'd walk around and I'd come back, and I'd blah, 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 all the way down, oh, who am I speaking tonight? What am I going to say? Will they like me? Does my mom like me? Does my sister like me? What, blah, 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 and on and on and on and on. And I fast forward and I work the steps, and I have this spiritual awakening. I start to bring this conscious God into my life with everything I do. And I'm walking down this same path one day, and I look to my right and I go, oh my God, look at these kids playing ball. Man, this is awesome. And I walk over there, and I loved watching kids playing ball, and I had coached. And so I look, and I look at this lady, and I go, my God, this is so awesome. How long has this been here? And she goes, about 40 years. So I've been walking this path for years, hundreds and hundreds of times. And I was so into my head, I never noticed the little league park off to the right. That's alcoholism. This self-talking mind. And it is what it is for you. And in this dry state, in this dry state, I get new jobs, or jobs that I call new, right? One of them is a job at the supermarket. And without turning in a resume or having an interview, I give myself the job of the guy who counts people's items in the 15 or less lane. And that becomes my new job dry. And I sit there, and I'll sit there, and I will count your stuff if it looks like it's more than 15 items. And God forbid if it's 15 items, because then I'm going to say something, right? Because that's my new job, or the job on the freeway, where when I'm on the freeway, the speed limit turns to 85 miles an hour in the left lane. And if you're in that lane, you better move over, right? You can't go 70 in that lane. And I become that job, and I start cussing people out. And my sponsor once said, Murph, why don't you take God with you and put him in the passenger seat? Would you cuss in front of God? And I started to find that as I drove and people cut me off and God was there with me, I just would look at him and go, oh, well, I didn't have a reaction anymore. And it led me to understand that all the times that I had reacted and followed people down the freeway, blaring my horn, I didn't have to do that. That was an unnecessary thing. That was a thing that through my thinking, I did. Through my dryness, I did. Through my alcoholism, I did. And I get to Alcoholics Anonymous. And like I said, there's so many well-intended people that shared with me and gave me these things to do. And you know, my story is kind of like what it was like, what happened, what it was like, what happened, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. You know, it wasn't that smooth ride. And so, you know, I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I got with these people. These people told me to go to meetings, you stay sober, and all these other things. And that was what I was talking about earlier. I would go to these meetings, and these meetings turned into God for me. And I would go to as many of them as I possibly could, because in that 1 hour or 1 hour and a half, I was free of thought. Right? The meetings started to do what alcohol did for me. And it freed up my mind. But when I left the meetings, it was turmoil. Like I said earlier, it was, I hated life. And, you know, and don't get me wrong. I had good times. I had laughter. I had fun, but I never got a solution. Right? I didn't do these 12 steps. I didn't find a God. And I drank after 2 years, you know, and I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous 2 years later, and I was destroyed. I had tried to hurt myself. I had done many things. I ended up in 50, you know, I was 5150 and different things like that. And, you know, I went to a rehab, this beautiful rehab. I was lucky, I had enough God. God was watching over me, you know, that I had the right job and the right insurance. And, you know, I was able to go through this 30-day program, and I came out on the other end, you know, with a lot of rehab words like trigger. One of my most hated words is trigger. If I'm untreated, a one-legged cricket can cause me problems, right? That can trigger me. I don't like that word. That's a rehab word. And so, you know, I started to stop thinking of things being the triggers. What is the trigger? Well, the trigger is my alcoholism. The trigger is my mind. It's my perceptions. That's what triggers me. And they're usually wrong in an untreated state. And so I started my new time out in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And I made it 8 years this time. 2 years of it was without going to any meetings or anything. I completely lost contact with people. The other 6 of it, I worked the steps, and I worked them a few times. But I came to understand something that's so important, that if I don't surrender everything, all of me, in that first step, if I hold on to just a little bit, anything, oh, if I hit the lottery, I might be able to drink. Oh, if I get my kids back, maybe I can become normal again. And all these other things that we use, you know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, all these maybes. If I have any of those things, any lingering thoughts, I'm going to work that 4th step on my will. And if I work the 4th step on my will, I'm going to be afraid. I'm not going to be thorough. And I'm probably going to be dishonest. And so I did those 6 to 8 years. I don't even know if I ever had a spiritual awakening. I truly don't. And I must not have, because although I did change, we all change. I mean, when you put down the drink, you're going to get better than you were when you were drinking, right? You're going to start going to jobs and being on time, or you're going to get a new job, or, you know, you're going to get your kids back, or whatever the case may be. But if I get all that back with the same untreated mind, eventually I'm going to lose what I've achieved, what I've gotten. And that's my experience. And after 8 years, I drank again. And I came back again, trying to hurt myself. I was so sick. I spent 39 days in the hospital. And so many things happened to me, and they had to do so many tests and do all kinds of different things on me. And I can remember the day I got out of the hospital, and I took what I had with me when I entered the hospital, and I walked down the hill to the street where the bus takes me home, takes me back to Burlingame. And the power of alcoholism, the power of your mind untreated. After all of that, the first thought was, I know there's a bar 1 block down. And as the thought entered my head, the bus pulled right up in front of me and the doors opened. And I had this 10-second space of no thought other than get on the bus. And I walked onto that bus, and it took me to Burlingame. And I walked off the bus, and it was 7:59 on a Friday night. And I knew that I looked across the street, and there was that pink church that had Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And I walked into that pink church instead of walking into the bar. And I'm coming up on 14 years, and it's been absolutely different. Although I started out knowing that I needed to work the steps, I knew that much. I needed to get some form of relief, and I did, but I didn't get enough. And it was about 3 years in, and I went to this meeting in San Francisco, and this guy was speaking. And for some reason, I was ready to listen. For some reason, my ears were open. And he shared something that I had never heard shared in Alcoholics Anonymous. He shared things that I'd never read in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Kathy loves this. You know, our big book is a living thing. The words change as we grow spiritually. Have you ever looked in the book and gone, I've read this 25 times and I've never seen that here? You know, the book is alive. And as I grow, all these things in the book change, right? That's why I never hold on to a big book for more than 2 years. I highlight in the big book so that I can see 2 years later what I highlight now and how that's changed. What is important to me has changed, right? And so I don't use that book as some kind of a badge of honor where you walk into the meeting and it's hanging, you know, the pages are hanging off by the binding, and you're sitting there going like this, yes, I've had this book for 71 years, you know, things like that. It doesn't mean anything. That's my ego again, you know. And so after that meeting, I walked up to him and I looked him in his eyes and I said, I'm dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. Can you please help me? And he said, it would be my honor to help you. And he asked me to tell my story, you know, and I told my story to him. And in that time, he knew I was a real alcoholic. You know, we've stopped doing that in meetings. We've stopped asking the newcomers to tell their stories. There's so many people in Alcoholics Anonymous that aren't alcoholics. They might be hard drinkers. You know, there might be an event that has happened to them that got to them so much where they, like a drunk driving or something like that. And they get to Alcoholics Anonymous and they find this beautiful fellowship that they've never seen before, you know, and then they stay and there's nothing wrong with that. But because they say the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. But I have to ask myself, is a desire going to keep me sober? There's things that I have to do. And so we went back to his house and he said the most important thing that was ever said to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, are you ready to stop working Murph's Anonymous? Are you ready to stop picking and choosing the parts of this program that you're going to do, expecting the unbelievable, beautiful results that we get in Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm going to read this because this was my life early on and later on, in my untreated state of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I found this piece of paper, right? And it was stowed away in this drawer. And it said, it may describe you. I don't ever go after what I truly want, because then the dream will end. I am so used to living in that dream world. It has become a part of me. If I continue to do this, nothing will be accomplished. I will continue to go through this mundane life being satisfied just to be able to exist. I'm coming to find, and it's a frightening place, that it's not success or failure that I fear, but it's the loss of the dream. And that's what I have been doing my entire life. I've been living in this fantasy world, in this grandiose world. I was terminally unique. You could never understand what had happened to me. You would do exactly what I'd do if you had been through what I had been through, and on and on and on. The grandiosity, the unsatisfiable mind, and all these things of an untreated alcoholic. And I started to work the steps with him, and I was so, I was at the low point. And I don't call it a bottom because I hate bottom. I hate low bottoms and high bottoms, because what is a high bottom to me might be absolute agony and pain to someone else, right? And so, I had this place that I had never been to before, and I made that surrender, that full surrender of everything. And I came to that second step, and because of that surrender, it opened my mind just enough for the idea of God to come through. You see, what I think a lot of us have gone through, and I know that I had gone through, was that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and I thought I had a problem with God. But that wasn't true. I came to find out that I didn't have a problem with God. I had a problem with your God, with Liza's God, with Kathy's God, with Jane's God, with Tiffany's God, with Connor's God. All the things that you had told me about God, all the things that, religion had told me about God. And I do not down religion. Religion is beautiful for those who choose that. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful. And if it works for you, do it. If your God is Jesus, and I know that word just kills people because mine is, beautiful. If it works for you, fantastic. It doesn't have to be everybody's God. It had to be my God, what I thought was God. So my sponsor had me take 2 sheets of paper. One was every negative I had ever heard of God on that sheet of paper. And the other was what I thought God would be if there was a God. And I took that negative thing, I looked at it, I crumbled it up, I threw it in a waste basket, and I started my relationship with God through that. Loving, kind, wants me to have abundance in everything, wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. And I got to the 3rd step, and I understood finally what it meant to turn my will and my life, my thinking and my actions over to the care of this God. And sometimes that was difficult. Sometimes I had to turn it over to someone else in these rooms, right? But it always came back to God, because you cannot keep me sober. No human can. Humans are going to let me down. That's why it's so important to find the people in these rooms, like I was talking about, that have that joyous, free, and happy life outside of these rooms. And when I got to the 4th step, for the first time, I went to the 4th step and did it on God's will and not Murph's will. Right? For the first time, when I looked at my father, it wasn't about what my father had done to me. It was about what has happened to my father. Why did my father do the things he did? Why did a 6'5", 350-pound guy hit me like he did? Why did these things happen? What was in him? And I found out the truth about my father, that in World War II, his job was to get the prisoners out of the prisoner of war camps, the Jewish prisoners, and what he saw damaged him. And when he got home, my uncles told me he was never the same man. I started asking questions. I found out that his first wife at a picnic got stung by a bee in the throat. It swelled in, and she suffocated and died right in front of him at this picnic. And my brother was there and saw it as a 6-year-old child. My dad lost that dream bar. He went bankrupt. We lost our home in the bankruptcy. And he was an alcoholic. And for the first time, I had empathy for a man that I had hated for 40 years. I had wasted so much time, and I didn't even know his story. I didn't know his pain and suffering. What a waste, right? And I was free. I always tell this about my brother because it's one of the most important things and one of the most powerful things. And it was a healing that I got through his 9th step, because that little 3-week-old niece, who is now a grown woman, my sister, and had kids of her own, went to look for him because she wanted to find out medical information about him. You know what he was going through for her kids and things like that, right? And so I get a call a few weeks later, and she found her father, my brother, and he was in the 17th year of a life sentence in prison. And he asked if he could write me, and he wrote a letter. I said I don't care, and I got a letter a few weeks later from him. And in that letter, it said, I was wrong that I wasn't your big brother. And I was wrong that I left you with your father, and a few other wrongs. He said, is there anything I can do to make this right? And that sounded so familiar at the time, right? And I wrote him a nasty letter back because I had not lost the hate for him. And he wrote me another letter back. And it said, I didn't do this for you. I did this for me. And I thank God that you were brought into my life, because today I feel freer than I've ever felt before. And it turns out for 16 of the 17 years, he had been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he facilitated AA in the prison he was in, Florida. My brother would go on to say that the biggest prison he's ever been in is the prison of his own mind. And that when he found God, when he found that power, it unlocked that prison, and he walked out a free man. That's the power of the 9th step. That a man is free behind bars and had a purpose. 2 months ago, my brother died in prison, free. I learned so much over the years through him. That relationship was mended. And he became one of the most spiritual people in my life, and I miss him so much. Those are the beautiful things in Alcoholics Anonymous that we can get. And I found out through my sponsor and another man that my part in the 4th step, the exact nature of my wrongs, in that 4th column, is everything that I'll need for the 5th step, the 6th step, the 7th step, the 8th step, and 9th step. All of those steps, I can look back at that 4th column and find the answer, right? So I did my 5th step, and how much time I got? I did my 5th step, and you know what the 5th step says, right? To God, to myself, and to another human being. How many of you in your 5th step sat with God for an hour and told him the exact nature of your wrongs? It is so powerful to do that. How many of you sat there for another hour and told yourself the exact nature of your wrongs, and then told them to another human being, to your sponsor, to your spiritual guide, whoever that may be? There's so much power into telling it to God and to yourself, because when you get to the place where you're talking and sharing that secret with another human being, you now have a grasp of what's going on with you. And then your sponsor can help you with that. And then you sit for an hour and you make sure that everything that you've done, all 5 of those steps, that you have committed, you fully surrendered, that you do have a power in your life that you're trying to grow with. You do have an understanding of what your power is. I'll never understand what God does. I can never understand these things. It's futile for you to try to figure out that if why are children starving, or why did this child have his life taken, or why did this person lose a job, or all of these other things, right? And you can always trace those back to our humanness, right? Maybe children are starving because the billionaires that have enough money to help with this choose not to. Maybe it's a human thing. Maybe it's not God that's doing these things. Maybe it's a human that is doing these things. And I started to understand through that 6th and 7th step, and through the 6th and 7th step, which are none of our business. Those who use drop the rock and the 12 and 12 for the 6th step, that's your thing. I know that in the big book, the 6th and 7th step are a paragraph long, and it's because it's none of my business. And the humility in it is, I don't know. I don't know what my character defects are. Some of my character assets that I think are character assets turn out to be character defects. And some of the things I think are character defects turn out to be character assets. I don't know. I'm asking God to take all of me, good and bad. I'll give you an example. Procrastination. I thought I had a problem with procrastination, and I was miserable. And I was going up to my sponsor and I was talking to him, and he said, "You think procrastination is your problem?" I said, "Well, yeah. I won't go to school. I want to, but I won't go to school." And he said, "What are you afraid of?" 4th column in the 4th step. Fear is the exact nature of that wrong. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid that I won't make the grades. And he said, "So you've never walked in a college class, you've never opened a college book, and you know that you won't make the grades?" Fear is a lie that we tell ourselves, right? I said, "I can't afford school." He said, "How much does it cost?" I said, "I don't know." I convinced myself I couldn't afford school, and I didn't even know how much it cost. It's a lie that we tell ourselves. In an untreated state, the fears that go on in my head are lies that I tell myself. And if I continue to believe the lies, they will affect my life as if they're the truth. I have got to have a power that can stop my mind, stop that thinking long enough so that I can become aware of those fears, see the lies, see them for what they are, throw them out, give them to God, ask for the strength to get through them. When that happened, my mind was clear of all those thoughts when I got rid of all the fears. 2 days later, I was with a friend of mine enrolling in college. Procrastination wasn't my problem. Fear was my problem. And I'll come to find that all these character defects are direct result of fear in my life, or dishonesty, or self-centeredness, or self-seeking. One of those 4 things. If I find out what those are, the defective character seems to disappear. God's ready for it to be taken once I'm aware and see it. And I get to the 9th step. I make all my amends. Not some of them, not the ones I want to, all of them. If I have amends still out there, if it's 3 years or 2 years or 2 months and I still have them out there, I haven't done something towards that amends, I am walking around ready to be untreated again. Because someday one of those things is going to come up and it's going to bite me in the tail, right? And then the next thing you know, within a 24-hour period of time, that treated mind can go to untreated. I can push God out and go, what the hell just happened? The 10th step. A step that is with me all day, every day. It says I get a daily reprieve based on my spiritual, I say connection, right? The book says condition, same thing, right? And then people go, what is the reprieve from? And I'm like, I used to ask that question. I never would ask you because I was afraid you'd think I'm stupid. But I would never. What is the reprieve is from my thinking. I get a daily reprieve from this negative self-talking mind based on my connection with that power. That's why I have to grow spiritually, right? I have to keep God with me and practice it every single day, becoming aware. And the 11th step, my favorite step. And I talk about like my friends, vultures that stand on the bedposts. And as the eyes open, there's them vultures just looking at you. Hey, let's talk about how unappreciated you are at work. Let's talk about how the girlfriend disrespected you yesterday. And before I know it, I can have a foot off the bed and that mind can be going in all different directions. So every single day I surrender. My life run by my will does not work. It never has, and it never will. The clock stopped at 2:50. So no, I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. And so I surrender to God every single day, right? And I look at that and I ask God, direct my thinking. Let it be divorced of self-pity, which is the highest form of self-centeredness. Dishonesty, fear. Let me walk through this day with you in my hip pocket, right? Set an alarm if you have to for every hour. If you have to set an alarm, set that alarm. And when it goes off, just go, hey, what's up, God? How you doing today? Today is awesome, or today is not awesome. Good and bad I give to God. Sometimes I need to give the good to God more than I need to give the bad to God. In a happy state, I need to have as much of a conscious level with God as I do when things are not good. And at night, I look back at my day. Where was I selfish? Where was I self-seeking? Where was I dishonest? Where was I fearful? But not only that, to become aware of these things, to see the lies, to get rid of them, give them to God. But I also have to look at the good things, the beautiful things in the stream of life that I've brought into the day, the great and gorgeous and loving things that have happened to me, and I bring those into my life every single day. And I work with other alcoholics. It's the biggest joy I get is watching the eyes of an alcoholic change as that spiritual awakening is coming. And I have that spiritual awakening. I keep God with me every day. And I get to that 13th step, which is heaven on earth, which is a peaceful mind, which is a place that I told you I got right in the beginning of this share, where I love me. I love Murph. I love everything about Murph. Do I have my moments? Absolutely. But I know that God is there for me in those moments to give me strength. Thank you so much for allowing me to be at this meeting. I love this meeting, and I was so happy to share it with you.